So, how did you resume your life in America after the return from the ashram?
Not easily. I lived, we lived in Manhattan or Queens, one of the boroughs,
Mhm.
and he had a friend. She was singing in The Sound of Music,
Mhm.
and this friend her husband had built this very fine restaurant with French cuisine in Sutton Place, the wealthiest place in Manhattan.
Mhm.
It was called Proof of the Pudding.
Mhm.
And I became the manager there. And I began learning, you know, serving, preparation, working with the chef, counter cook. And it was a place where all the celebrities came.
But you had
And
had no experience
no
in
experience.
food or
Nothing.
none at all.
Mother gave me all of it. All of it. It was
Ah,
just so natural it came. And so and so Gore Vidal would be there one
ah,
day, and then Otto Preminger another day, and then and we never paid any attention to them, which is just
right,
what they
right.
wanted. You see,
Yeah,
you serve them, joke a
absolutely.
little with them, and that was it. One day, a fellow comes to me and he says, "My name is Fred Weintraub,
Mhm.
and uh, and I have a restaurant in Greenwich Village,
Mhm.
and it's failing. If you would manage it, we can become partners, and I'll give you half."
Mhm.
Well, so I go there. I bring a chef that I knew, young man, excellent chef. Within a few months, I'm making money like I'd never seen in my life. Unbelievable. I mean, money is just pouring in.
What sort of a restaurant was it?
The only French restaurant in all of Greenwich Village,
Okay.
and which was a hamburger and hot dog place. And so everyone came. And I mean everyone. Andy Warhol would bring 9, 10 people every night. And then there would be Woody Allen
Oh,
and Neil Diamond and Frank Zappa and the Mothers of
my God.
Invention. And I mean, it was incredible. In fact, it exposed me, but I had to be very careful because there was a lot of drugs there at the
Yeah,
time.
yeah,
A lot of drugs. But it exposed me to music, and these fellows were real musicians. Zappa would invite me to his concerts, and I would have to get into that music. And Mother said, in every music there is something, huh? But
Mhm.
you have to find
Yeah.
it at the very height. And I learned a lot. Richie Havens would come all the time, and wonderful guitarist and singer. So I became friendly with many people.
And the hippie movement had not yet
No,
taken
the
off.
hippie movement had taken off. It had taken
Oh, it had
off
already taken off then.
mainly in San Francisco first,
Okay.
but then in New York also. So things are good. Um, I'm married to an E, and one day this girl shows up, whom I almost had an affair with in college, and she says to me, well, she was a beautiful girl. She passed away some years ago of leukemia, but she had a very, very painful marriage. And she just said to me, I wonder if we could take off, take continue from where we left off.
Mhm.
So we're in a car together, and she goes to kiss me and screams. Mother's face comes out of me, and that was it. She became very devoted to Mother. Met Annie. We incredible.
Which year did you marry Annie?
62 towards the end. Mother said to have the fire ceremony,
Okay.
which we had, with that same Pandit Sinha.
Okay.
Things get mixed up a little bit, you know what it's like. And I didn't tell you about Prithvi Singh, who Jyoti Priya, they were very close, and she said, "You take him under your wing,"
Mhm.
and he did. And I met his whole family, and I was very close with Sumitra, Sujata, Suprabha, Abhay Singh, and Noran Singh.
Noran Singh.
Yeah. Young kid, you know? I mean,
Yeah.
look what mother had done. So I go back to work, and one day a voice says to me, "Go to California and help Jyoti Priya." Wow. Continues for a week. So I write to mother. No answer. The voice doesn't stop, Maurice.
Mhm.
Keeps going every night. Here I am making money, incredible experience of life, and this voice keeps saying, "Go to California and work with Jyoti Priya." Finally, I write mother again. She sends me a telegram. "My answer to you was so positive that I thought I had written it." Well, there are other things that I'd like to talk about a little bit. About some people that I met in New York. One of them was the writer and one of the most wonderful men I ever met, Rene Philip Miller,
Mhm.
who wrote many, many books and was a close friend of Dmitri von Mohrenschildt. And Dmitri von Mohrenschildt and Eleanor Montgomery were I met through Rene.
Okay.
And I would go to New Hampshire, where Dmitri was teaching at the time, and just be there with them. And then he would come with me afterwards during Christmas time. And one day, and this has to do with poetry, and I'm saying it for you to share with you. I'm alone with Dmitri in his study, and he says, "Read some Savitri to me." So I read quite a bit, and he thanks me. And he hands me a book, and he said, "Read this, St. John Perse." And I start reading, and he pulls the book out of my hand, and he starts reading it. And I heard the sea, and I heard the waves, and then I knew you read poetry in different ways. Poetry has to come from the soul. And he taught me so much with that one experience. So I, studying voice, I had the opportunity to meet great musicians. I met Andres Segovia, the famous guitarist, actually shook his hand when he would come to this place called Town Hall, where all the young musicians would come, fill the room. They would put hundreds of seats on the stage, and he would be given a little space.
Yeah.
And he shook my hand, and he buried my hand in his. And I said to myself, how can a guitarist have fingers like ham hocks? And still, I mean, it was a marvelous experience. So I had a chance to meet many people like that. And I met, I went to a concert with a Concordia choir from Moorhead, Minnesota, conducted by this very, very tall, very, very regal man, Paul Christiansen. And in that choir, when they sang, I had never heard such perfection. And this, of course, later comes into the Om choirs now. So at the end of the choir, I actually got the courage to go backstage and ask Mr. Chris Johnson a question. I said, "Sir, what is the secret of your success?" And he said, "It's very simple." He said, "You pare away all the crud to get at the essence."
Mhm.
I was told later by friends, I was singing, both Annie and I were singing at St. Bartholomew's Church, the great church in Manhattan, because I used to earn $32 a month, and that would cover everything in a rent controlled apartment and everything. And this man told me that he had sung with Chris Johnson when he would bring choir directors from all over America. And he said there were moments when there was such beauty and perfection that the whole choir would break down in tears, and it would take 10 or 15 minutes before they could continue.
Lovely.
Yeah, so
One person, Narad, I would like you to talk about, because he is another mystery for us in the ashram, and that's Dimitri. How did you meet Dimitri, and how did Dimitri get on this path as well?
good. Well, glad you asked that, because he was a very close friend, very generous friend also with his retirements. He would always give me money for the Matrimonio Gardens work. But we met and became very close. And he was, at the time, the editor, and he actually formed a magazine called the Russian Review,
Mhm.
which was during the communist heyday. And he published Samizdat. And the Samizdat was the papers smuggled out by people to tell what was actually happening in Russia,
Okay.
in his magazine called the Russian Review. So, actually, in California at Stanford,
Mhm.
they have a room devoted to the Russian Review in his
Okay.
honor. So he meets Eleanor, and Eleanor Montgomery is an extraordinary lady, tremendous occult power. I can remember her sitting in the playground next to Mother, and all that power dwindled like a little kitty cat next to Mother's feet. But my goodness, when she would get angry, I mean, the room would shake. So she convinces Dmitri to come to the ashram. You have to come to the ashram. He agrees. He comes to the ashram, and he is put off by absolutely everything. He can't stand the regimentation, the uniforms of all the different ages, the different workshops and everything. This is meaningless to him. In fact, it's just completely turned him off. I'm going back. So Eleanor says, at least you have to look at Mother once. This has never been told to anyone else. He told me this. Eleanor says she's playing tennis today. Go and see her. Just stand outside. He stands outside, watching Mother hit the ball. At one point, she turns to him and she looks at him, and he says, I levitated 3 feet. That was it. He was hers. What brought him here was that he had read prayers and meditations, and he said, I have never read anything like this in my life, and the person who has written this, I must meet. Well, when he retired, he came back here, and Sue took care of him in Golconda. And Sue told me, Narad, I don't think he really ever did sadhana except in that last year of his life when everything happened. So That's Dimitri. There's more. I never met a man who had greater command of the English language, a larger vocabulary. You know, he was in the Tsar's Navy,
Yeah.
and he escaped to Paris, and from Paris to America. Quite a story, too, because he just barely escaped. And conversationalist, such a brilliant mind. But it was that one moment when Mother lifted him like that. That was it.
Wonderful.
Oh, well, I met Madame Tolstoy when I was studying music, and she was Tolstoy's daughter. And she would always buy me ice cream sodas at a local fountain place and talk to me about her life. And somehow these people like Paul Cadmus, the artist, and all that, Louise Talma, who wrote an opera with Thornton Wilder,
Yeah.
and it was called the Alcestiad, and I was asked to do the first performance for him, and then it was actually put on in Germany. So Mother has blessed me always with music and always in horticulture. When I got to California to work with Jyoti Priya, I had no money, and he and I found a very cheap place to live, very near the center. And two things happened. Two extraordinary things. We began working with her. We had a bookshelf in teak that we had at our old place in New York, and we brought it there, and all her books could be displayed. And I started learning Savitri, because somehow Savitri for me was my way. And I memorized the first three cantos of Book One and would recite them there. But what happened was something so unique. My father would cringe if I lifted up a hammer or a screwdriver because I was totally inept. I mean, I had no facility whatsoever mechanically.
Yeah.
There was this huge room in the back, and it was dilapidated. And I said to Jyoti Priya, why don't I make an arts center? Actually, I did the plumbing, electrical, carpentry, built a stage, did shoji screens, and in a Japanese style with mats and all that she gave me. And still some of it remains today, that ability that I had no ability whatsoever. Well, that was one thing. Now, the next thing is going to shock you. Because just as I could have made so much money and sent it to Mother at the restaurant, another thing happens. I get a job with a landscape company, and I've never experienced anything like this. They would go out into these nurseries and find plants that were growing in awkward ways.
Mm-hmm.
They call it plants by form. And they would make the most beautiful gardens you could imagine. If you went to Beverly Hills, you would walk into a house, and we used to have these Saturdays where people would take us, guides, docents. And you would walk into the house, they would welcome you in the house, and suddenly you would see the backyard, and it was an extension of the house. And it was, it may be a desert scene, it may be a tropical garden in one family, and these fellows did everything. Well, then I get another job on Rodeo Drive in Beverly Hills. And Gregory Peck calls me up and asks me, what new tree do you have today? And I say, Tippewanna Tippu. He says, I have to have it just for the name. Send it over. And then Vincent Price would call and he would say, what end of a begonia is up? And which end do I plant? And so all the stars again, once again. Well, I'm learning so much there. So with my father all those years, it was temperate climate horticulture. Now it's subtropical. See, she's preparing.
Preparing you
Yeah.
slowly.
And what happens is the most incredible thing. Now, this place is probably worth between $50 and $100 million. Real estate alone.
Hmm.
Forget the garden center. So one day the owner calls me and he says, I have no children. And as long as you have been here, I feel that you are my son. And I'm getting old and I want to retire and give you the place. That week, mother sends me a telegram. A bientôt. What did she care about millions of dollars? She cared about one soul, as she cared for each of us. And that will begin yet another story. I'm switching back and forth in time here because it's very important to relate to you what happened. In New York, before I did the restaurant, I was just trying to survive. And there was a man who baked organic bread in Connecticut. And I was delivering that bread into the restaurants in New York City.
Hmm.
One day, he and I are coming back, and it's a blizzard. The road is like glass, and we're coming down a mountain road, and two ladies are parked perpendicular to traffic. They said, rummaging around for a flashlight. Well, there was no way to stop. Brakes don't work on glass. And he went through the windshield. So, we write to mother immediately. Kailas is there in New York.
Uh-huh.
And she sees mother at the head of Annie's bed. And I write to mother, tell mother that she's all scarred up. And mother writes back, there will be no scars. And I'm given the message, go out and get vitamin E capsules and put them on the scars every day. No scars in the end. I mean, she went through the windshield. So what happens now is that where someone spills a cup of coffee at McDonald's and gets $3 million, we got $3,000 for the damages, just to pay for the medical expenses. So I write to mother, and I say, Mother, you have saved her life. I want to send you the $3,000. Mother writes back, why don't you use the money to come for the inauguration of Oroville? Each ticket was $1,500.
And Annie had begun to turn towards the mother?
Very much so. Very much so.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, completely. And that takes us to the next thing. We arrive here in 1968 for the inauguration.
So that was her first arrival in...
No, I think
Yeah.
she's later. Sorry.
Okay.
I come.
Okay.
No, I think we both come and then we come back again. Okay. In any case, no, yeah, okay. Mother gives me permission to photograph the ceremony.
Okay.
You can see me with my back and the camera photographing. All that went to the archives in Oroville. So then on Annie's birthday, December 18th, Mother calls us. And there's a man with us. His name is Isidore from the East West Cultural Center. And the three of us go before Mother. I'm mixing up my times, but you'll please excuse me. We go into the room. No one else is there. I go all the way in, and I'm on Mother's right. Annie is in the center, and Isidore is on the left, being the last one to come in. Well, Mother smiles at Isidore, this huge smile like the sun breaking on the sea. And he's gone in 2 weeks. This is not for him. Then she looks at Annie, and she says the following. This is not the first time we have met. You have been with me many times before. Many, many times.
To Annie.
Yeah. And Annie remembered all of this thing. She remembered being in Egypt with Mother. And remembered the pyramids, Cheops, everything.
Mm-hmm.
Then Mother turns to me. And she says, you don't want to come to Oroville in a few years? I feel you can do something there. And I said, yes, Mother, whatever is your wish. And that was that great meeting on Annie's birthday. So that's now, see, I've mixed up times, but that's when we go back to work with Jyoti Priya again. And that's when I get the jobs. And I write to Mother, oh, I found a wonderful teacher, Philip Chandler. And he had a garden that when you looked at this garden, you didn't want to leave. It was so filled with peace and everything just in a perfect way of harmony. And he taught me plant combination theory. Well, I write to the mother because she says, I feel you can do something there. No, then Udar writes to us, and he writes to me, and he says, Mother has told me to write to you and tell you that she would like you to come and prepare to build the gardens of the Matrimandir. You know, and Mary Helen once wrote to Mother, and Mother wrote back to her, the gardens are as important as the Matrimandir. That's a whole story I'll get into another time. So I write to Mother, Mother, what would you like me to do? To do practical work or to go to college? Mother writes back, both. Well, I've got a few years, and that's when this whole thing takes place. The landscape company, then the nursery in Beverly Hills. And so things are going very well. And then that's when Mother writes, 3 months later, a bientôt.
A bientôt.
Yeah. So I didn't have 3 years. I had 3 months. And in our next interview, I'd like to tell you about what she said about the gardens in Oroville and how she poured into me this connection with flowers that she has opened up to the whole world through connecting with the vibration of each flower, and by a mental approximation, giving us its message for humanity.